Hey everybody, Red Mage here. Welcome back to this series where I go through different RPG products that I have and give them a quick flip through and review. In this one I'm going to be going through 3 old school adventures for different systems. These are all pay what you want on Drive-Thru-RPG, and they're all really interesting in very different ways. The first is Escape to Blackboot Bog, which is a moonlit path crawl for Cairn. This is the shortest at 11 pages. The second is the pay what you want version of Seven Sealed Spirits, which is by Watcher DM, Austin Holm and Gabriel Watcher, for Knave. And this one actually does also come in a pay version, but it's twice as long. It's a sort of an expanded one. But this is the pay what you want version. And then the last one is the Gloom beneath Stonefell Keep, which is a pay what you want dungeon crawl for Shadowdark. And this one's 31 pages. So let me go through them all, starting with Blackboot Bog. This is probably the most unique of the 3. It's very odd. It's a path crawl, and it's sort of like, I don't know, you get the sense it's almost like a roguelike. I mean, I don't know, that's not really what it is, but you get the sense you could play this kind of over and over with a different group, or maybe with the same group, and have them make different choices and try to achieve, get to the end of the path. It has that sort of vibe. It's only a 2 to 3 hour adventure, sort of on a strict timer, and by the end of it, you've either succeeded or you failed, and if you failed, it's just over. So it's an interesting adventure here. The idea is that you're in the city, the party's in a city, and it's about to be attacked. There's a plot to overthrow the rightful ruler, or actually not so much the rightful ruler as it turns out, but she's the ruler of the city, and she wants her son out to safety. And so she sends him through the Viscount, or rather through the advisor, sends the Viscount Lorenz outside the city to bring him to this friend who lives out in the bog, who lives in a cottage out there in the bog. And so the idea here is that you're playing on a timer and you're basically picking the paths that you want to take to get to the bog. And there's adventures at each point along the path. So it's sort of like, as you'll see on the map here, it's very much, pick your point and then it goes forward. And there's a few, destinations that you can go from each point. And they all eventually lead to the bog. And then the goal is to find the cottage in the bog before dawn. And it's very important that you find it before dawn, and that's why the timer is so strict, because at dawn something kind of horrific happens out in the bog, and you don't want to be out there. So you want to get the boy to it before the end. Now, I have a question about that, as we'll come to it at the end, but anyway, you have the adventure overview, the timekeeping and light, and how that works. You have the map here, and you can see it's pretty straightforward. You just have a few points on the map. So you start at A, and you have to get through to B, right? And then you go down into the bog here with various options. As you go down. I think it's cool. It's an interesting little point crawl. You have the legend, and then you have the summary of paths. One of the things I like there is that there are random encounters. So there's a key location, and then there's a random encounter location, and essentially, if you happen to roll that, or if you happen to run across that, then you roll, then you know where to go with it, where it is relative to the other destinations. But then you have the summary of the paths, too, and which ways you could take, right, from A via to, and then how long it takes to get there. So it's a nice little summary here of the adventure. You have the key locations and the different encounters that occur in each of them, and they're fun. They're kind of interesting. The NPCs that you run into are memorable and engaging and pretty cool. This is a pretty good adventure. It's all laid out with the major locations first, A, B, C, D, E, and then you get the random encounter locations and descriptions of each of those places further on. Now the sort of secret here is that the cottage, this person you're sending you're bringing the boy to, is actually the mother of the Countess, so the boy's grandmother. But she's been cursed by his mother, or rather by the warlock who did it at her behest, because she wanted to take over, and so this old woman was the ruler. She was cursed out and stuck in the bog, and now the Countess gets to rule. So why is the Countess sending her son to this cursed mother if she wants the boy to survive? Because it seems very likely that he's going to die on the way, or even that once he's here he's going to die, because the curse is of such a nature that it sounds like the only person who survives it every night is Gertrude. Now you could change that. You could make it so that the boy, because he shares her lineage, isn't affected by the curse, or is just he sleeps through the effect or whatever. But the idea here is that the cottage in which she lives, she can't leave it, and it turns into a giant spider that goes around the bog drowning people at night, and she's part of it. So she becomes the spider, and she just looks on as this happens. She can't control it. So what happens to the boy if he's in the cottage? Does he also turn into the spider? Does he die? It sounds like other people die. That's what it says here. If you give the letter to her, she'll give you a reward that was left by the previous guests. And it's a bunch of, adventuring stuff. So it seems like they all stayed and died. And she also says, don't stay here at night. Get out of here if you can. So it's interesting. I don't know what's going on. Is the mother trying to get her son killed? Does the mother not know the full nature of the curse? Does Gertrude want the boy to die? Does she want to protect him? It's just, that's unclear to me. And you could always navigate that, but it's just a weird kind of conclusion. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me why all of these people would be doing what they're doing. So that's an interesting little element. You'd have to kind of adapt that, I think, because I think players would scratch their heads and say, wait, what? Why would we leave the boy here then? Shouldn't we take the boy with us if he'll die if he stays? So it's unclear. Okay. Then you get the random encounters, and then at the very end you get a nice little piece of art about the bog spider going along. This is by Zeno and Craft, and it's a great little adventure. I think with that one question aside of why I didn't pick it up. Maybe I missed something in the adventure. It's very possible that I missed something in the adventure, but it just seems odd. But leaving that one element aside, I think this is a great adventure. It's a great idea. So I'll put a link below to where you can get it. Again, it's pay what you want, so I highly recommend you guys check it out. The second is the pay what you want version, as I said, of Seven Sealed Spirits. This is made for Knave. This is by Watcher DM. This is a very interesting adventure. It's essentially an island hex crawl with a bunch of really interesting locations and NPCs and kind of faction play going on. A lot is packed into these 16 pages. I'm very tempted to get the double size version, although it's about $10, so it's kind of expensive for a 32-page document. But you get a lot in it. And so I think if it's just an expansion of this, and I think there are several more dungeons and things like that, then it seems like it's a good bet. Because there's a lot packed into this. The idea here is that there's this island that had some spirits who used to rule it, and then dwarves came and sealed them under the earth, and then the island volcano erupted, and the dwarves are all locked in stone. They all died. And then a few centuries ago, other people started coming to the island. Fishermen, sailors, merchants, pirates, and stuff. And now there's this spirit under the earth who is awoken and lured a wizard to him. And the wizard freed him, and then he realized that it was he's such a powerful spirit, he resealed him in a different location, and now the spirits, there's sort of this cult that's grown up around him and this kind of crazy wizard now, and it's great. It's a bunch of stuff going on here. The writing is a little confusing at times. You really have to pay close attention to the descriptions of rooms and locations and NPCs, because things will be mentioned on one page and then they'll be referenced again for a couple, at least it seems to me. And so if you don't have those connections, you're going to be a bit confused. Now, fortunately, a lot of things are hyperlinked, which really helps. So if you're going to print this off, that'll be a bit more tricky. But if you're not going to print it off, you'll have hyperlinking, and that's great. And not everything is hyperlinked that's in bold, but a lot of the things are, if they refer to page numbers or particular characters or locations or quests, they are hyperlinked, and that's good. The idea here, and the idea behind the spirits, I should say, that the actual 7 sealed spirits, they're all really cool. Daystar, Twice Lion, Stormbloom, Targrasp, High Talon, Silk Tongue, and Smokeweaver. Great names, very evocative, and they all fit what the creatures are. I really like Twice Lion, especially. But they're all interesting enough, and they all can give you boons if you side with them. And there's some sort of competition amongst them. Targrasp, for example, seems to really dislike Twice Lion, and I'm not sure exactly why, but they really have an enmity. Targrasp is the thing kind of binding Twice Lion under the earth now that the doors have been opened. Seems like Targrasp is the thing kind of holding everything down here. There are other things that are sealing creatures down here. Silk Tongue seems to be keeping High Talon down. Silk Tongue is trapped by this endless scroll. It's kind of a funny thing. But the rest all seem to be related to Twice Lion, more or less, except Smokeweaver. So Targrasp, Smokebloom, or Stormbloom, Twice Lion, and Daystar are all tied up with that down below. There are things called mirror mains, which are kind of like lions, but they have fiber optic mains. That's how it's described in here, and they're really cool. They can cast mirror image in certain kinds of weather, and they get surprised. They're kind of hard to see. They're really cool. It's a cool creature. And then they're the sort of Twice Lion is their avatar, so to speak. You get the Smoke Wizard Den, and then you get the Zerai Ruins, which is the Dwarven Ruin. It's a cool dungeon here. There's like a golem construct or a golem construct chamber. You got some clockwork wardens and things like that. You have a creepy cricket, brass, sonic guardian that can patrol around the ruined surface and down below. And then you have the seal chamber, which is where you go into the seal chamber and it takes you to the place where all the spirits are kind of captured. Now there's one kind of odd feature here, which is that the rooms are not evenly laid out. I mean, so for example, floor 1, Spirit Catcher is its own room. Silk Tongue is its own room. But then the Targrasp treasures are each one of the rooms. So it's not laid out like terribly clearly. You're like, okay, wait, Onyx Armor is a, oh, that's down here. Okay, so Onyx Armor, that room is right here. But it's at a very different level than the Silk Tongue, which is this room here, right? So you kind of have to like piece out where things are. It's not abundantly clear right away what's being, how these things translate. It's not hard ultimately to unravel, but it does have to be unraveled just a little bit. And so that's a little confusing. But once again, you have hyperlinking, and that really does help. These are where all the different spirits are basically trapped, except the smoke, except the, what's his name? The guy outside. So the rest of it is just, it's a really cool dungeon. Honestly, I have to say it's a really cool dungeon. There's a lot of interesting features. You can choose your directions. It's unclear to me how you would know one way from the other just by going through it. Like it's unclear to me that you would know to go right goes to Daystar Sanctuary and to go left, or I guess in this case it'd actually be flipped because you start in the Mirror Forest. But it would be unclear to me why the one or the other would be the way to go. So maybe you put some additional signs of one or the other image there. And they're all interesting because, again, you can try to kill them or you can try to free them. They're very strong for Cairn stat blocks. I think 40 hit points, 28 hit points, 28 hit points. Yeah, there's a lot of hit points. I'm not sure. I'm not as familiar with Cairn, but it seems to me that the levels of hit points are quite high for other old school games, too. 40 hit points, for example, with Stormbloom. That seems it's a level 10 spirit, so killing it is going to be tricky. But if you free it, then it goes to the surface and it starts to attract supporters. There's a sort of an effect of what happens if you kill it and if you free it. And there are different ways of freeing some of these creatures. Let's see. There's good art. So, for example, I had a question about what a hand cluster looked like. I heard a description of it. It was inky blobs of hands that are coming out. I'm thinking sort of like the Ganon hands from Zelda, right? From the not Breath of the Wild, but Tears of the Kingdom. But I didn't know exactly what it looked like until here, page 13, where it shows you the hand cluster. So it talks about them earlier, but you get the image of it here. Things like that happen throughout the book, where you might have a question about what something looks like or how it's described or what it's doing, and you kind of have to wait a little bit before you find out, or you have to go to another part of the book to discover it. So you need to read through the whole thing at least once in order to get the whole picture. This is not something you'd pick up and run on the fly. Definitely not. But you get patron boons. I like this. So each of them, if you do kind of curry favor with these, you get some benefits, and those benefits are pretty strong. And they also tell you a little bit about the creature itself. So High Talon, for example, which is this giant owl, if you do befriend this spirit, it gives you sneak attacks on monsters. Sneak attacks on monsters deal 5 times damage instead of 3 times damage. The relic of it is a carved bone, and it doesn't like if you show mercy. So that is how you get disfavor. So you get a sense of what this thing is like, right? It's sneaky. It's an owl, so it strikes out of surprise, and it doesn't like mercy. Stormbloom and Smokeweaver. Stormbloom is too wild and violent for boons, which makes sense. And Smokeweaver bestows spells, not boons. Gives you spells, and there's a list of spells that Smokeweaver can give you early on. Just interesting. For example, Targrasp doesn't like giving anything away for free. It's a merchant. That's essentially the idea. It's this personified merchant, Targrasp. It holds on to things. It's kind of cool. And then if you do wake up some of the NPCs on the island, there are these sort of objectified, is the spell, I think, villagers. And if you do wake them up, and then things can happen and war can start on the island. Some random tables of you looted a wizard, you looted a pirate, and as a spirit is destroyed, what happens? Really interesting little adventure. 16 pages, and again, there's the paid version, which is twice as long, which I'm very tempted to get because this is cool. This is really cool. The spirits are interesting. The dungeons are well laid out and designed. There's a little bit of that, at times ambiguity about what's being described. It's very terse in its language, so things are, it's laconic. You don't get a lot about each of the things, and sometimes that means you kind of are going to have to fill in your own. But I don't mind that. I actually like that in adventure design. I like having to add in my own stuff. So 7 sealed spirits. Again, this is pay what you want. I'll put links below to where you can get it. Finally, we have the Gloom beneath Stonefell Keep. This is also a pay what you want adventure. This one is the least, I would say, it's the longest, but it has the least sort of extra stuff going on. This is a dungeon, and it's very clearly a dungeon crawl. It's also dark in not just the Shadowdark, but it deals with some dark themes, or at least I noticed at least one that was pretty dark. These kids had been kidnapped from a village ages ago and turned into vampires. Now they're little kid vampires imprisoned in sarcophagi beneath the earth. That's pretty dark, right? So keep that in mind. But I think it's a good adventure. It's a good dungeon crawl. You have some adventure hooks here, and one of them is just pretty standard. Sudden violent storm forces you to seek shelter in the nearby ruins. This is a dungeon crawl, right? One of the hooks is, hey, there's a dungeon, let's explore it. There's nothing else beyond it, so it's very clearly like old school dungeon. You're going to delve. Here's what's going on, and here's what you can find. Now the maps are reserved for the very end. It would have been nice to kind of have those pieces of art on the pages, but you can look it up. They're Dyson Logos maps at the end there, and you have the surface ruins, and then you have the crypts below, and the real danger here is the Bone Naga. So there's giant spiders, dung beetles, swarms of rats, a gray ooze, and a bone naga. So it's undead. You're dealing with cursed tombs, clerics, priests are going to be pretty strong down here. And by the way, this is for level, I think it's at level 4. Yeah, 4th level adventure. So it's slightly higher than base Shadowdark, which is good because we have a ton out there of base Shadowdark adventures. I like slightly higher adventures. More interest there. And they're a little bit less common. One of the things you see in this book is the tick boxes for hit points. You see this a lot of times in some adventures I've seen. It's more useful, I think, if you're printing an adventure. So if you get this in print or you print it off, which is fairly easy to print, there's not a lot of art or there's no color, so it'd be fairly easy to print. You would have a very easy little checkbox. It's harder in PDF to make use of that. You have some random encounters here. What I really like about the Bone Naga is it has this paragraph, the tell, which is when moving the creature sounds like a rattling bag of bones on flagstones. So that's really cool. You can describe that to your players as it's getting close. If you roll, you say, for example, I really like using the underclock die for my random encounters instead of standard random encounter mechanics. On a 3, you get the sign of the next encounter. If you rolled the Bone Naga for that, you'd have the sign, right? The players hear this rattling bag of bones sound on the floor. We got some giant spiders. All 3 of these have spiders, which I'm arachnophobic, so that's kind of an interesting fact that I picked 3 adventures here that all have to do with spiders. One of the 7 sealed spirits is a spider with a human face on its abdomen. Really creepy. Of course, Escape to Blackboot Bog had the spider cottage, and this has giant spiders right away. But you can see the layout is very, very straightforward, right? It's very simple. You don't get a lot of extra stuff. You just get a description. You get the more detailed description of the room. And one interesting thing is that sometimes the description comes after. So, and I assume the description is what you read to the players. It's italicized. I'm not a huge fan of italicized text that you read aloud. I think it's better to just describe the room, and the DM can choose how to lay it out. Although some DMs, especially newer DMs, really appreciate having that description. You can just read it, and if it's well written, which these are all well written, then you've gotten the basics of the room for your players, so that's helpful. But sometimes those descriptions come after the DM text, and sometimes they come before. So just an interesting little layout choice there. I don't know if it's a layout choice or if it's an accident or what, but it's interesting that varies. Got some magic items. You got some giant rats. Here's the Edna's spawn, these children. The small caskets. Etched into the book is the phrase, "Let the children sleep," written in Dwarven. It's creepy. Each of the small caskets are held close with a hasp and pin. They are Edna's spawn. Slumbering for over a century, they are starving and attack immediately if freed from their coffins. It's dark. Dark stuff. But again, not the end of the world. You got some magic items here and a spell book, which is pretty good. And you have a fur cloak of a dire wolf, which is a benefit and a curse, which is always good. Like to see cursed magic items here. Hall of Heroes with some creatures there and some magic items. And again, it would be nice to see, there's a lot of space for the maps. You can see that. Like there's lots of times when there's just a bit of open blank space on the page. I think putting the map in that corner would have been great. Yeah, it would have been a little bit more work, but it would really help bring this adventure up to the next level or make it much easier to run on the fly. And especially because you don't need a lot of background for this dungeon, this is the sort of thing you could run on the fly. Easy, easy, easy to drop this into your world. Super easy. It doesn't require anything much except some dwarves nearby and vampires and that sort of thing. Maybe there's some rumors about an ancient dwarven family in the past or something like that that ruled in the area. Kind of nasty. There's some new monsters and some NPCs. And then there's hired goons that enter the dungeon. Now, this is interesting because it seems like there's another thing going on, right? There was another adventuring party that came into the dungeon. They didn't make it. And then there's some goons who've come in to help betray him or to help betray his party, but now his party's all gone. And so it says the PCs are a suitable alternative. So you guys have treasure, great, we'll take you. So it'd be interesting that there is a little bit of NPC interaction here. And then a couple of paragraphs here of final thoughts and further adventures if you want to add stuff in. This is great. Here's the maps at the end, Stonefell Ruins and the Stonefell Crypts. A player map, and which is blank, and then the other map, which is yours. Now, one thing is for player maps, I tend to prefer, if again a little bit of work is done, to remove things like secret doors from player maps, because if you're going to use a VTT, it's hard. If you're going to share this with your players, first of all, they have it. Now suddenly they have the secret doors. They know they're there. But if you're going to put it on a VTT, then it's a little bit harder. You have to like cover up the wall a little bit, for especially the way that these are done, and make sure the players see none of the hatching. Because if they do see most of it, if it's like there and then there's one part you hide, it looks kind of obvious. So again, I tend to prefer, if you're going to include a player map, remove the secret doors from it, and then they can appear on the DM map. But it's a minor point, and it's not the end of the world. Gloom beneath Stonefell Keep for a pay-what-you-want dungeon, 31 pages for level 4 Shadowdark. That's great. Just throw it into a game, and you now have a new dungeon. So these three are all pay-what-you-want. The Gloom beneath Stonefell Keep for Shadowdark, 7 Sealed Spirits for Knave, and Escape to Blackboot Bog for Cairn. I'll put links below to where you can get them all on DTRPG. I hope these have been interesting, guys, and I'll see you all in another video.